Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Thursday morning class. Today's class is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to be going through a text, but I just wanted to share with you something that's on my mind over the last few days. And I'm sure you've been following the news, what's going on in Israel. It's so devastating, it's so difficult. And where do we go from here? What's our response? What do we do? What's our thought process? What's a Torah perspective on this situation? You know, generally on Thursday morning, we finished the Gate of Trust, and we wanted to start a new series this week, but we're going to have to postpone that for a week or two. But today, I just wanted to share what's on my mind. You know, I think someone put it very well, that, you know, the Jewish people are sitting Shiva. It's difficult, it's sad, it's painful, especially as the news, it hasn't closed yet. It's still raw. You know, every day you hear more and more news. The death toll is rising. It's very difficult. But at the same time, we know that the Torah gives us guidance in every area in life, and this is no different. Perhaps it's easy to sit at home and kind of be numb, watch the news, cry, but ultimately, we are people of action. We have to do something about it. And there's a lot that we could do in terms of, you know, sending donations and things like that, which of course is important. But there's perhaps a perspective that we need. So I just want to start with connecting it to this week's parsha. We start anew. We start the entire Torah from the beginning, from Genesis. Genesis 1:1. That's this week, the Parsha Bereshis. And the Parsha Bereshis talks about the creation of the world. It also talks about Adam and Eve. And it talks about their children, Cain and Abel, Cain and Hevel. So there was a point that there was only a handful of people, of humans on the face of the earth, perhaps four people alive. You know, the whole world, the whole planet to yourselves, 4 people. And what happens? One child murders the other child. In other words, they murder a quarter of the world's population. Right? Cain gets upset at Hevel, and Cain kills Hevel. Now, it's devastating on so many levels. First of all, obviously, anytime someone dies, it's devastating. When someone's killed over something so, so foolish, it's devastating. When a parent loses a child, it's devastating. When a parent loses a child because the other child murdered the other child, of course it's devastating. And it's even more devastating when this is the first death of history. There was no other death before this. The concept of death wasn't experienced up until this point. So Adam and Eve, the parents of Hevel, are now dealing with a loss. There is the loss of a child, but now what? What do we do? And it says that they were there and they were confused, they were lost. They didn't know the concept of burial. What do? Someone died. Someone was killed. Now what? So the Midrash tells us that God sent an orev. An orev is a crow, a bird. And the orev went to bury another crow, a dead crow, another dead orev. and it was burying it. And Adam saw this, and he said, wow, look at this. Look at this act of kindness. Not the bird died, and we're not just leaving it lying, but we are lovingly burying it. Oh, this is what I must do with Hevel, with my son Hevel as well. I have to bury Hevel. And that's what he did. He dug a grave and he buried his son. And there are many questions that come to mind when thinking about this story, this midrash. And one of the questions is, what was so difficult about burial? Like Adam couldn't have figured that out on his own. It doesn't take that much to figure out that you got to bury. In fact, God already told Adam that you come from dust, you come from the earth, and you will return to the earth. So the idea that you have to bury a person in the ground wasn't new. He seemingly knew about this already. So why did he have to see the crow, the orev, bury another bird in order for Adam to realize that he should bury Hevel? And one of the explanations that I've seen is that Adam HaRishon, he was bothered by something. He was bothered by the fact that how could this happen? How could there be so much evil in the world? How could another child of mine, one brother, murder in cold blood another brother? How is this possible? How do I move on from this? How do I live life? How do I raise children in a world that has so much evil, so much negativity? I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to move on. This is what was bothering Adam HaRishon. What has the world come to? Hevel, my child, was killed. Now what? How do we move forward? That was his question. He knew that he could bury his son. But his question was, what type of world do we live in? And that's obviously a question that's on our minds this week. What type of world is this? How could there be people who have so much evil within them? That was his question. And what was his answer? The answer was that he saw the oirev, he saw the crow, which the Talmud tells us that by nature, the crow is evil. The crow does not think of others. Very selfish. Does not help the other children. It says that the children of the crow, the chicks, the little birds, they call out to God because their mother isn't there for them. The crow has a little bit of a negative instinct to its nature. And when Adam saw the crow, the oirev, who was doing an act of kindness and burying another bird, Adam saw there is goodness in this world. There is kindness in this world. Yes, there's also the opposite of that. And boy, do we experience that. But ultimately, let that not define the world as we know it. Let's see the positivity within the world. Let's see the good acts. And that is what allowed Adam to go forward, to move on, knowing that there are good people, knowing that we have within us the goodness within us that could be expressed and has to be expressed. And that's why we're here. And that's what the world is really all about. This is what the message that God was sending Adam HaRishon. Yes, your son was killed, which is horrible. But don't let that define you and your family. Find the goodness within everything. Do an adding goodness. Do another act of goodness and kindness. That will give us the strength that we need going forward. So, talking about our situation, which again, we're still sitting Shiva. But to think about a response, what we have to do, in addition to helping with funds and all that we sending to Israel. But in our personal lives, we could also help. When we unite together, and when we add in goodness and kindness, even in a very personal level, even if it's something that no one else knows about, doing a mitzvah, that is what really helps the situation. That is bringing positive energy into this world. And I want to just talk about that for a moment, because we studied for a year. We studied the gate of trust. And the gate of trust talks about the trust of God. And I think this is very important, a perspective to have when we go through something like this, an atrocity like this. Because often you'll see people in a situation like these go to, what our response is? We have to add another mitzvah. Jewish men should put on tefillin. Jewish women should light Shabbat candles. Do a mitzvah. Say a prayer. Put up a mezuzah on your door. And perhaps a thought that may come through your mind is, what in the world? What's the connection? Why would I put on tefillin, and how would that help those suffering in Israel? How would that help my safety and security by lighting Shabbat candles? What's the connection? And perhaps you may say, well, it's a time of inspiration. Time of inspiration, take advantage of it. You're feeling inspired, do a mitzvah, which is true. But truthfully, there's a lot more to that. Because when we're talking about safety, for example, it's very much connected to our mitzvahs, to our acts of goodness and kindness. Because as we have learned in the book of trust, in the gate of trust, that ultimately everything comes from God. Everything comes from God. The good and the bad. Everything is from God. And when we want to do, at the same time, even though everything comes from God, at the same time, God wants us to do our part. God wants us to do our part. God doesn't say, hey, I'll provide. You sit and laze around your house and just sit around do nothing, and then don't worry, I'll send a check. I'll wire you whatever you need. No, God does not say that. God says, I want you to do your part. You help yourself and I'll help you. But truthfully, it's more than that. It's not just God helps those who help themselves. God helps those. God helps everyone. God wants that there should be a facade. God wants that it should seem as if you're helping yourself, but ultimately it's God's protection. It's God's help. Ultimately, everything comes from God. Even what we do on our own, it's only as if we're doing our part, but ultimately it's making ourselves a vessel, to be a recipient for God's energy, for God's help. So when we're in this difficult situation, we feel perhaps unsafe. Yes, we have to hire a security guard. Yes, we got to set an alarm system. Yes, we got to do all the security measures that we need to take in order to secure ourselves. But at the same time, doing another mitzvah is not just a nice spiritual thing. That is really part of it. Because ultimately, it's God who brings safety and security. And if we want safety and security from God, we got to do what God wants us to do. That's another mitzvah. So when we talk about adding in acts of goodness and kindness, which we have to do at this point desperately, it's not just because we are inspired, but ultimately it really makes a difference. Our little mitzvah, there is no little mitzvah, but our mitzvah that we do brings salvation. It brings security. It brings all the blessings that we need from God. In the maybe perhaps 70s or 80s, the Rebbe in Brooklyn, New York, was giving a talk. And who was sitting at his talk? It was mainly Hasidim, yeshiva boys. It wasn't Israeli politicians. It wasn't the Israeli security. It was American boys, yeshiva boys, yeshiva girls, men and women who have nothing to do with Israel's security. And the Rebbe was speaking very strongly about the security in Israel, what Israel has to do and do this and don't do that and that, right? Very passionate talk about the security of Israel. And in the crowd, in the women's section, there was I believe a journalist, a Israeli journalist who was there listening to the talk. And after the talk, she went over to one of the Rebbe's secretaries. And she asked, why is the Rebbe speaking to a bunch of Hasidim in Brooklyn about the security situation in Israel? What are they going to do about it? And the Rebbe's response through the secretary was that when my Chassid in Brooklyn does another mitzvah, when they add in their Torah study, when they do it, they give a little more charity, when they pray with extra kavanah, with extra intent, that does make a difference to the situation in Israel. So we have to do our part. For those who are involved in security, have to do their part. But as Jews, we have to know that when the situation like this arises, we have to add in acts of goodness and kindness, add in positivity, say another prayer, wake up in the morning and say the Moda'ani prayer, thank God for life, do some morning prayer, do some evening prayer, say the Shema. If we haven't checked our mezuzah recently, check our mezuzah, make sure it's kosher. Perhaps there are certain doors in our homes that don't have a mezuzah yet. We maybe only have in the front door. So maybe add another or a few mezuzahs, maybe put mezuzahs on all the doors of our homes. If we put on tefillin once a week, we should put on tefillin maybe every day. Maybe make a resolution for the next week or two or month. We're putting on tefillin every day. Shabbat candles. Maybe we forget sometimes. Make sure we light the Shabbat candles. Make sure we light it on time, not too late, before sundown. I mean, there's so many resolutions we could take. One little mitzvah is not a little mitzvah. It's a major, major statement. It's a connection to God, and it will bring down all the blessings that we need from God at this moment. So I'm going to end with that. I know we're a little early. It's a lot going on, and like I said, it's difficult to talk. I feel like I'm still sitting Shiva, and our thoughts and prayers, of course, with the people in Israel. We should have safety and security and all the blessings that we need. We'll do our part. We'll send those donations. We'll do what we have to do. We'll also do the spiritual part of it as well. We'll add in acts of goodness and kindness, do another mitzvah, and everything together should bring all the blessings that we need, and the ultimate blessing with Mashiach. Let it be today. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you for joining us. Good to see you, Tom, and good to see you, Diane, and all those joining us on Facebook. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.